Hi, I'm David Annexon, the president of Verona Safety Supply, and we are here at a job site in Verona, Wisconsin today to talk about the current ANSI standards for SRLs, but more importantly, how that applies to how your employees need to tie off in a lift. There's a few different options that we'll talk about that you can use to tie off in a lift. We will also talk about our Verona Safety's best practice recommendation for aerial lift tie-off. In August of 2021, ANSI updated their Z359 standard for self-retracting devices. This update included multiple things to make SRLs safer to use, including more rigid testing requirements, a higher weight limit for the testing. It also included the reclassification of the SRL devices themselves, which to me is the most important part of what we're going to talk about in a minute when we talk about aerial lift tie-off. Class 1 and Class 2 SRLs are how they reclassified the definitions for Class A, Class B, and leading edge language. A Class 1 SRL is designed to be tied off at or above your dorsal D-ring. A Class 2 device is designed to be tied off below or at your dorsal D-ring. This applies to aerial lifts because most of the lifts that we get into have our anchor points at our hip level or below our dorsal D-ring, which means we need to use a Class 2 device per ANSI. Historically, most contractors used Class 1 short lanyards or traditional lanyards in an aerial lift. There's still a couple manufacturers out there that'll give you a letter of interpretation allowing you to use their Class 1 devices in a lift. You will not comply with ANSI when doing so, but we have to remember ANSI is a voluntary standard. You will still comply with OSHA based on the manufacturer's recommendation. All right, here I'm with my associate, Justin Sundet. He's actually going to walk through some of the processes that we think is your best practice when tying off in a lift. At Verona Safety, we think that if the lift is in motion, that's when you're most at risk to being popped out of this basket. And we think the best practice for a user in a lift when those wheels are in motion is restraint, keeping him tied to those controls. When you're moving this lift around, especially on some rough terrain, that's when you're going to get the most bounce in this basket. Once the worker gets this device into an area where he can put it at height and do the job that he needs to do, in other words, when the wheels are not in motion, we want him to transition away from restraint into a Class 2 device. People might ask me, Dave, why can't I use the traditional Class 1 devices that some of the manufacturers will allow? My answer to that question is pretty simple. There's a better way. There's a better product on the market, so let's move to the best practice. And that's what we're here to talk about today. We're going to talk about our recommended best practice again for tying off in the lift. And right now I want to focus on if the wheels are in motion. If Justin's moving this lift around, we believe the best thing you can do is keep him tied to these controls. Keep him in restraint. Reliance actually makes an adjustable restraint lanyard that they specify as an aerial lift restraint lanyard, but you can use other adjustable lanyards from Faltec, Guardian, Safeways, 3M, Miller, you name the manufacturer. You get yourself a 4 to 6 foot adjustable lanyard. It's going to do about what this Reliance aerial restraint lanyard does. And what Justin will do with this lanyard, he'll take this lanyard and he'll run it through his side positioning D-rings, and he'll attach one end of each part of the lanyard to the anchors that are at the bottom of the lanyard. Our goal here, again, when the wheels are in motion, is so he can't be ejected out of this lift. He can operate his controls, he can do what he needs to do to get to the workspace he needs to get to, but he's not going to be thrown out of the lift. And that's what we want you to do when the wheels are in motion. If you were to choose, if you have a lift that maybe doesn't have these anchors available, you can get a tie-back restraint lanyard from Faltec, where you can actually take this part of the lanyard, tie it around a piece on the lift, and then use this restraint on the back D-ring to keep him in position. All right, we're at the point now where the wheels are no longer in motion and the worker's ready to put the basket at height and do the work he needs to do. It's at this point that the worker should transition from restraint to fall arrest. We recommend that you use a short Class 2 device to make that transition to fall arrest. There's a few different devices on the marketplace that'll work for that. You can get the Class 2 SRL from 3M called the Nanolock. Other brands have similar models that you mount to the user's back, and you tie off to your anchor point with this snap hook. Justin is using the Werner Max Patrol 10-foot Class 2 SRL. It's one of the only short SRLs on the market that's made for Class 2 tie-off. It's important to remember that the shock pack needs to be connected to the user's back, and the unit on this one can actually be anchored to the lift. In Wisconsin, we like to call it backing the pack. Once he's transitioned into a rest, he can now work at height and he can move around the basket. I don't recommend using a 20-foot or a 30-foot or a larger SRL Class 2 device in a lift for a few reasons. One is it's bulky, but secondary to that is the more rope you allow the guy to move around with, the more opportunity you're giving him to misbehave. Justin's finishing up his work here. Another reason I want to point out that we recommend Class 2 devices above and beyond the fact that he's tied off below his dorsal D-ring, and that's what the ANSI Standard recommends, is that if he falls out of this basket and happens to hit the gate latch or the gate latch over here, that kind of constitutes a sharp edge, and that's where, again, from my professional opinion, I feel a lot more comfortable keeping my guy in a Class 2 unit. When he's done doing the work and he needs to move the lift again, we're going to want him to transition back into restraint. All right, we've talked about what we at Verona Safety think is our best practice for tying off in an aerial lift. And to recoup, again, it's staying in restraint whenever the wheels are in motion, when that lift is moving. And then when you transition to working at height, transition from your restraint to your fall arrest. We've already established why we think restraint is the best choice while the wheels are in motion. There's a few options like we talked about, the aerial lift lanyard from Reliance, an adjustable lanyard from another manufacturer. You're also allowed to use a 6-foot non-adjustable restraint lanyard. At Verona Safety, we recommend a short Class 2 device for your fall arrest. The key about restraint, though, is making sure that whoever's in that lift cannot be ejected from the lift. So whatever restraint lanyard you do use, just remember that to keep a person in restraint, you have to have that leash short enough so they cannot be ejected from the basket. If you choose to use a shock-absorbing lanyard while working at height, that's a better lanyard than a restraint lanyard if there's any opportunity at all that the user could be shot out of that lift. But again, I would recommend full restraint while the wheels are in motion. Again, I'm David Annenson, president of Verona Safety Supply. I'd like to thank my associate, Justin Sundet, for going through the motions and showing you guys what we think is our best practice for tying off in an aerial lift. I'd also like to thank all of our suppliers, specifically Reliance, 3M, Werner, Safeways, and Faltech, for bringing out some of the equipment we needed to show you what we think our best practice is. And most importantly, I'd like to thank you all for listening. Hopefully you learned something here. Hopefully you can put it into practice in your field. Looking forward to seeing you working safely out there.